Now, a little bit about our presenter today. Edwina Norton is a lifelong amateur painter, published poet, and peace activist. She earned BA and MA degrees, taught English in community college, and had a long career in organizational development. Now an ordained Zen priest, she mentors Zen students in the Red Cedar Zen Community in Bellingham. She's here to discuss her new memoir, Autumn Light, My 50 Years in Zen. So, with that, please join me in welcoming Edie Norton. Edie, it's so nice to have you tonight.
Thank you so much. Pleased to be here. So I'll get started. First, I want to read a little bit about Zen practice just to get us into the topic. So I'm looking at pages 1 and 2 of the introduction. The basic instruction for how to practice Zen is to just sit, quote unquote, just sit, and observe what happens in the mind and body. No visualization, no mantra to recite. Just sit quietly and focus on the present moment. Eihei Dogen Zenji, the 13th century Japanese founder of the Soto Zen tradition, the practice that I follow, claimed that Zazen is not the process of learning to meditate so one can become enlightened. It is the very act of being enlightened. That is, sitting Zazen itself expresses enlightenment. This concept has profound implications, but it can also be read literally. Sitting Zazen opens or enlightens the mind to a deep and broad awareness of reality. It can appear to an observer that in Zazen one is doing nothing, but the practice actually requires a very active engagement of both body and mind. To sit still yet energetically alert for 30 or 40 minutes, one must pay close attention. Zen practice is a study of the mind, how it functions, how it eludes reality, how it masks truth, and with the right stimulus, how it can reveal to us important insights. Based on what we learn about and from our minds, we are guided by Buddhist teachings toward ethical, beneficial actions in the world. The mind works in seemingly serendipitous ways because we each are conditioned by many factors from past and present. We are usually unaware of our deepest conditioning. Our thoughts and actions are often unconsciously driven. Until we study our minds, our habitual actions can be, to a greater or lesser extent, outside our control. Through Zazen, we can bring our attachments and delusions into awareness, where it is possible to release them, train ourselves in beneficial mental habits, help others, and live more happily ourselves. Zazen can be calm and restful, but it is not an escape, as some believe meditation to be. At times when the mind is repeatedly distracted or frustrated, or when one is in physical pain, it takes concerted effort and commitment to remain seated and still. Zazen reveals and reflects whatever is going on in our life, including unconscious material. In fact, Zazen is a window into the unconscious. It informs us of negative emotions, beliefs, and perspectives we didn't know we had. What comes up during Zazen can be disturbing, even alarming, but it helps us know ourselves in a deeper way than ever before. The first few chapters of my book describe life difficulties I had that eventually led me to seek Zen, a very different practice from the Protestant church in which I grew up. For one, I was bullied in adolescence. Then later in life, I found myself in an alcoholic marriage with a tragic outcome. In my mid-30s, I discovered and found refuge in Zen Buddhism, and I began to deal with the damage from these earlier experiences. In the book, I write about my earlier conditioning and how Through Zen practice, I came to understand and overcome long-term dysfunctional behaviors. I practiced for some 30 years with several Zen teachers in California, for a year in Japan, and in 2003, I moved to Bellingham, where I've been practicing with the Red Cedar Zen Community here ever since. After 40 some years of Zen practice, I decided to ordain as a priest. I was inspired by the words of Zoketsu Norman Fisher, Red Cedar's founding teacher. He said, "There are 3 practices of being a priest. The first is to be humble, to realize that we don't know so much, that our understanding is always limited, and that our experience goes only so far. The second practice is to see everyone as Buddha and to treat everyone that way. And the third practice is always trying to help others. Priests have this obligation. It's not a choice." I felt these practices would help me be of use in my old age. In Japan, it is overwhelmingly men, young men, and boys even, who become Zen priests in monasteries. But in America and Europe, women can also ordain. A Zen priest can be married or single, live in a monastery or as a civilian, and belong to a lay practice, as I do at Red Cedar. What was unusual about my ordination was that I was 78 years old when I decided to do it, not 30 or 40, as most are when ordained. My age created some unexpected challenges, chiefly having to take part in a rigorous 3-month intensive monastic training at Tassahara Zen Mountain Monastery in California.
Pardon me, I need to unmute. So can you tell us why you decided to write this book?
Well, my initial reason for writing it was that I was very reluctant to go to Tassahara, and I tried hard to get out of it. But it was an absolute requirement for ordination, and I had to do it. Now, Tassahara is a beautiful place and well-respected Zen monastery, the first one in Western America. I had practiced there 3 times years ago at week-long retreats. But the 3-month training intensives are well known to be very rigorous physically and mentally. Little sleep, demanding schedule, many exacting rituals and regimens to learn. In order to encourage myself to do it, I decided to look at it as a research project for a book. I would keep a daily journal. This would give me some sense of agency in this endeavor I did not feel prepared for. Can't hear.
I'm trying so hard to be quiet over here, and then I forget I've muted myself.
You're doing a good job.
So can you tell us about the process, the ordination process to become a priest?
Yes. A student usually studies Zen and practices Zen for 8 to 10 years before ordaining. There's some variations on that, but that's usual. The preparation for the ordination ceremony itself takes at least a year of study and hand sewing a Buddha robe and okesa worn by priests. And it's a wraparound. It's about 5 feet by 10 feet, and it's all hand sewn, and it's 7 panels, and each panel is made up of 3 smaller panels, and it's a lot of sewing. It took me about 10 months to do it by hand, and all of it is very small stitches. I don't know if you can see. I don't think I can show this on the screen. Whoops, almost fell over. Can you see some of this?
A little bit, yeah.
There.
Oh, yeah. Oh, those are tiny, tiny
Yeah,
stitches.
tiny.
Oh my goodness.
It's a wonderful meditative practice.
Oh, I bet.
And
Yeah.
doing it, and I loved doing it. It's a very deep pleasure to do it, but it takes a long time, and you come along. I came along through it thinking, and why am I doing this? I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because I feel really compelled to do it. So it's a wonderful practice in devotion. There are a couple of other ceremonial items that I had to sew, and just before the ordination ceremony, the ordinee myself in this case, shaves her head completely to show that she is leaving her ordinary life to be of service to others. It's always a dramatic moment when the ordinee first appears for the ceremony with her shaved head. And of course, no one has seen her that way, and I had never seen myself with a shaved head either before then. So it was quite dramatic.
Well,
This is followed in the ceremony by a lot of chanting and bowing and receiving from the ordaining preceptor priest numerous items associated with ordination, and then publicly stating the vows to become a priest. So I want to read a little bit from the ceremony.
Okay.
And the priest was Tim Burnett, who ordained me, and so he's involved in this. During the ceremony, I was required to bow to Tim after receiving each of the items and putting on those that I was to wear. These were full bows to the floor, and I worried that I would step on my vestments when I kneeled. A friend in the audience told me afterwards that she was nervous that I would get caught up in my voluminous robes, but somehow I managed to get up and down for each bow without stumbling or falling. Moments of ceremonial grace. Once I had donned the karoma, which is the basic robe, black robe, but before I could receive the okesa, the big things that you wrap around, or Buddha robe it's also called, Tim conducted the most curious part of this ancient ceremony, the ritual cutting of a tuft of hair left from the shaving the day before. This ceremonial shaving signifies the complete break for the novice priest's former life and her bodily commitment to the Buddha Dharma, or the teachings of the Buddha. During this action, Tim chanted the following ceremonially verse 3 times. The last hair is called the Shura, S-H-U-R-A. Only a Buddha can cut it off. Now I will cut it off. Do you allow me to cut it off? And each time I replied, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Then Tim cut off the Shura and chanted, shaving your head and shaving your head again, cutting your attachments. You are now on the path of the Buddha. With the mind of complete enlightenment, you will free all beings from suffering. And I responded, freed from my ancient karma, freed from my worldly attachments, freed from form and color, everything is changed except my deep desire to live in truth with all beings. The phrase freed from form and color was particularly poignant for me because it reminded me of my lifelong pleasure painting. For a moment, I didn't want to relinquish the beauty of the world, though I knew that the meaning was to be freed not from beauty, but from having a preference for it. Still, this was a tender moment of renunciation. Now I want to tell you about my Tassahara experience, which takes up the bulk of the book. A few weeks following ordination, I went to Tassahara in California. It was very challenging and difficult, and I almost didn't make it through the entire 3 months. But I learned things about myself that I didn't know before, how my mind works, some original assumptions that no longer pertained that I had and couldn't have known before. So it turned out that to be a very enormously valuable experience for me, and also the deeper reason why I wrote the book. I wanted to encourage readers to realize that they too can change and grow, even well into old age. I wanted to show that when one pays attention to the mind and its habitual responses to situations, one can observe where one goes wrong and change the old habits. In hindsight, it seems almost magical that this can happen, but change is not magical. It requires close attention to the mind, which is what Zen Practice teaches us to do. Now I'd like to read some highlights and lowlights from my Tassahara experience. But first I'll tell you about the monastery schedule. Wake up bell at 3:50 in the morning. 3 periods of zazen in the zendo, followed by chanting and bowing at a service in the zendo, breakfast in the zendo, individual study in the library, followed by 30 minutes of temple and grounds cleaning, after which we returned to the Zendo for 2 more periods of Zazen, then a midday noon service, then lunch in the Zendo. After lunch, we met in an outdoor circle for brief announcements and job assignments for the afternoon. Then at 4:15, a bell was rung and we could have a break to do exercise and take a shower and soak in the wonderful hot springs tub that they have at Tassahara. That was the reward for all of our Spartan lives that we could do every day. Supper in the Zendo at 6 o'clock, and then Zazen in the Zendo again from 7:30 to 9. A very fast-paced daily schedule. Eating in the Zendo made things much more efficient. We each had bowls, like this one is called a Buddha bowl, and then 2 others that were nested in it, 2 smaller ones to eat from. And we had some of our monks would serve us food in each of these bowls, and we would eat it. And it was a ritual kind of eating and how you use the utensils and all of that. So there were lots of form requirements for it. And then they would pour water in from a pitcher, hot waters to clean the bowls, and we would get them clean and wrap. We had cloths that were in the package, and we would clean our bowls and tie them up and put them back by our chair. So you could get all of that done really efficiently and quickly and get good food as on top of that. So that's how that went. And in Japan, in fact, in male dominated or male only monasteries, the monks sleep in the Zendo, and they have their oryoki set right there as well. And so in the morning when they get up, they eat at some point, but they roll up their bedding and put it under their platform where they sit on. And then everything is right there within the Zendo. And it makes things very, very efficient and always kind of ceremonial. So it's pretty good. At Tassahara, we could eat. We ate most of our meals there, but we could get outside and sometimes did eat in the dining room for certain kinds of occasions. So now I'd like to read some chapters, from some chapters about Tassahara. In chapter 8, Learning the Ropes, I describe what happened in the first months of practice. Most of us new monks struggled the entire month to learn the specifics of each day's schedule and to carry them out correctly. There were 19 of us who were new to the practice period and doing it for the first time. There were altogether people, including all the residents who were there for much longer and lived there for a while. There were probably 60 of us altogether. So the new ones of us were the ones that had to learn how to do everything within the first couple of months. The biggest challenge for everyone may have been a subtle one. Our schedule replicated the Japanese monastic tradition of giving the monks a partial day off on days having the numbers 5 and 9 in their dates. This created a 5-day weekly rotation of 4 days of community activity and 1 partial day off for personal time. After a lifetime of 7-day weeks, 5 days may have been unconsciously disorienting. Eventually, we lost track of what that conventional weekday was, except for needing to contact someone on the outside world, which I rarely did. In fact, I didn't even know you could call out. They had said you can't call out, and I never thought, well, okay, I can't call out, so I never did. Some people were calling out nearly every day, so about the 3rd month.
And you never knew?
And I didn't know.
Oh, no.
We lived in silence. And so,
Right.
you couldn't ask questions. You had to just observe what was happening. If you didn't happen to see it, you didn't know it was there. So except for needing to contact people, we didn't know what calendar day it was. We monks learned to communicate with each other about time solely in terms of what kind of day it was. Like, is this regular or work, or what is this? Personal or sesshin? Once my brain fully adapted to this cycle, my daily dizziness subsided. On top of this subtle adjustment in our biorhythms, we often had to adjust to smaller schedule variations. Sometimes the leadership added or subtracted a regular day in order to schedule the correct number of sesshin days. or at the last minute, they changed a Dharma talk or ceremony, which would have occurred in the Zendo, to a presentation in the dining room. And these changes were not just change of location, but you had to dress in certain ways, different ways for each one. So there was always something that you had responsibility for besides just following the herd to the new place. These changes were usually not announced except on the monk's assignment chart outside the Zendo. I was not on a regular work crew, such as for serving meals, because I was old. So I was not even aware of this communications mechanism until the third month of practice period. This explained my repeated surprise and annoyance at the frequent unannounced schedule changes. On paper, these adjustments seem very minor perturbations, but simple enough to absorb. However, until I was well broken in, I experienced them almost as body blows. No doubt, old age played a role in my strong reaction. The training in forms and ceremonies, which were usually complex and required exacting performance, were difficult to learn because keeping silence prevented us from asking instructors for help. Meanwhile, the monastic schedule raced onward, but having to scramble to keep up probably helped us to let go of the immediate past and to attend only to the present moment, which is a basic Buddhist teaching. But the constant pressure was breathtaking. In chapter 9, Full Immersion, I'll read a couple of excerpts from practice period teachings. First, the abbess spoke of our personal practice bodies, she called them. The schedule, she said, allows us to get to know the body of our practice, the habit body or karma body. These words, these phrases I had never heard before in that way. And so I was intrigued by them and didn't know quite what. So I paid attention, made me pay attention. This contains ideas about ourself, our life story, built on what is already familiar. When things are not, dear phone.
Oopsies. She'll be right back, folks.
I'm on Skype or whatever it is in my book talk, so I can't talk. Thanks.
It happens.
It was my son. He said, okay.
Oh, which one? Alec or Dan?
Dan, the one who lives here. Poor fellow. Okay, where was I? About karma body. Yeah, and how we keep bumping into our karma body, which has been shaped by past karma and which also creates karma going forward. The schedule forces us to meet our habitual patterns as we try to manipulate circumstances to what we've been and done in the past. But because we cannot manipulate the monastic schedule, and you absolutely could not manipulate it, right, we feel unable to cope with this new situation. Or, she said, and paused with a twinkle in her eye, we can use the new schedule to liberate ourselves from our habitual karma. Thus, the abbess began to point the way to get through hardships of the initial weeks of practice period. I saw I was in good hands.
And didn't you say that she was she the first or one of the very few abbesses there that that your timing was fortuitous to be there, you felt, when there was an abbess?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and there have been several, but she was certainly not the first, but it was not as usual for a long time. And she happened to be a very kind person and still held a firm hand on everything. She expected you to do it all, but she could see you're dying. She could come and help you, that kind of thing. So this teaching began to define what we could learn by living in silence in community, getting rid of our habitual patterns. Later in the first month, another practice period leader gave us a good talk on dealing with difficulties while sitting zazen. First of all, she said, when you encounter torpor or boredom, go deeper. What is the quality of boredom? How do you know you are bored? What is in your body? What thoughts? What resistance? What's happening now? What is it you can't stand? Be a naturalist of your own experience to understand it. It will change because of your attention. Very true. Second, afflicted states such as resentment, envy, or anger, which are common in practice period experience. Resentment, envy, or anger are buried, scary places. Acknowledge and gently investigate them. If you encounter a part of yourself you don't want to accept, go slowly. How much can you sit with and not drown? Negotiate with yourself on this. So there was a lot of kindness in their strict regimen. Zazen posture is good for containing strong emotion. Sitting up with some energy can be a container. We can feel safe within the posture and allow afflictive emotions to arise. For one thing, the posture takes a lot of attention because you tend to get sliding and you tend to fall asleep and you get weak. And so if you revert back to how you're supposed to be sitting all of the time, that actually draws your attention away from misery, mental misery at least, if you're feeling that. The fourth one, when you encounter difficulties in Zazen, ask questions. What's happening now that's difficult? What is the perfect instruction I need now? Follow this instruction. Living in silence and community, we had the rare opportunity to observe our minds and our reactions to others, the stories we made up about them. This wasn't always easy. In chapter 10, Community as Mirror, I want to read a little bit what happened for me. For the first month, every day we interacted with people we had just met. Naturally, we used whatever socialization modes and skills we had developed in the past, perhaps long years past, such as in my case. We brought different expectations and behavioral habits to our relationships with different categories of people: the leaders, the work group teammates, dorm mates, and the handful of monks with whom we developed friendship in the little free time we had. I brought certain advantages to this situation. I had professional experience studying group dynamics, leadership, and communication problems in groups. I had attended many Zen sessions over the years. I knew how to share sleeping quarters and work tasks with strangers. I also brought two disadvantages. I was decades older than other monks, and I had lived alone for a long time, 30 years. I might be less aware and practiced in interpreting and flexing with other people's behaviors. Silent interactions with other community members provided many opportunities to observe my habitual assumptions about myself in relation to others. I shouldn't have been surprised that my habitual karma body reactions weren't always effective. I discovered that my strategy for integrating into a new group was to insist on being helpful. I hadn't been aware of this habit before. I became aware of it now only because it didn't work well. If it had worked, I might never have seen it. In our silence, perhaps my intended helpfulness was not evident to others. Whatever the case, when I saw that I was attempting to do, I was startled. Was I trying to manipulate people into accepting me? If so, I might be interfering with them, something I did not want to do. I was excited to realize I could discard this habit. Of course, I would help when asked, but I would no longer expect that helping would bring me acceptance. During the struggles of the first month and into the second, gently the teachers guided us into observing our minds throughout our fast-paced, stressful daily life. We were being primed for new understanding of ourselves and others before we would be asked to interact more closely with other monks. Toward the end of our first month of Tassahara and into the second, we had our first of 5 sessions, retreats of Zazen all day. I'll read a little bit about that. So at the end of the 5th day, we had a certain ceremony with the whole group. On the final evening of our first session, we monks participated in a shosan ceremony. In this ritual, the session teacher, in this case the abbess, sits in front of the altar. Each student goes to her, bows, and before the assembled students, asks a sincere question about his or her practice. All the monks asked interesting questions, and the abbess's answers were insightful. When it was my turn, I asked, how can I face my fears? And in fact, I didn't know I was fearful until I asked that question, but apparently I was. She said, set your intention every morning to get acquainted with your fear and every evening to evaluate your experience. Not to judge how well you have done, but to track your efforts in meeting and exploring fears, a gentle yet practical answer to ponder as later I lay down to sleep. That night, I had a powerful dream. In it, I opened the door to leave my small Tassahara dorm room. As I stepped over the threshold, an enormous leopard burst out from under the adjacent closed door, which in my dream I recognized as the door to the basement of my childhood home. The leopard lunged at me, snarling and clawing ferociously. Terrified, I leaped back into my room and slammed the door, shutting the leopard out. I woke up gasping for air. I had asked the abbess what to do about fear, and in the dream, fear jumped right out at me. The leopard became the messenger from my unconscious. I did not understand it while I was still at Tassahara, though I recognized it was important. But throughout the writing of the book, I explored its meanings again and again until I understood the role it had symbolically played in my life. Moving into the 3rd month, deeper personal and interpersonal issues began to surface. In my early years in Zen, friends returned from who had gone to practice period at Tassahara returned with stories about relationships that they had there, significant encounters with one or more fellow monks. Falling in love was a popular one, or having a serious ongoing conflict with someone. Both versions seem to be part of community living in silence, even the highly regimented life of practice period. In chapters 12 and 13, Saga Encounters and Rope's End, I described 2 conflicts I had, one with a seatmate on my right and one with a seatmate on my left. I kept everybody really close. My conflicts didn't spread through the whole Zendo. I describe how I worked through them using behaviors new to me at that time. With the first conflict, which was highly emotional and very distressing to me, I just sat zazen next to this person through the 3 months and never, ever discussed anything with her. And my distress one day evaporated. So zazen can prevail in difficult situations too. With the second conflict, I responded immediately and effectively in a totally new way to a small physical aggression she perpetrated on me, something I had never done before, never stood up to myself immediately like that. You'll have to read the book to find out about these conflicts and episodes. But I was really pleased that they were signs that I was changing. Mm-hmm. For now, I want to read a little bit from Rope's End. I had 1 more month of practice period to go, but I was beginning to break down. In mid-November, we entered the final month of practice period. The days were still warm and 80 degrees by noon. This was in California, and you could actually sunbathe in November, but near freezing at 4 o'clock a.m. I had the monastery routine down well enough to believe that if I just kept trying, I could make it to the end. We had 2 more 7-day sessions to sit. The momentum toward ever deepening practice was building. The expectation was that all of us would attempt to break through our conditioning. Head down, I would go forward. My body-mind had another plan. 2 months of sleep deprivation seemed to be as long as I could hang on to the rope of my determination. The mind now flipped chaotically in all directions, from determination to resentment, anxiety to anger, resignation to hope, blame to gratitude, appreciation to despair. I couldn't modulate the intensity of my thoughts and feelings, let alone direct them. They sank and soared on their own. Repeatedly, when I vowed to get more sleep, I continued to sit zazen every evening, as was the expectation. Repeatedly, when I resented someone's behavior and I applied the antidote I had learned called don't know what's really happening, soon I fell back into blaming. The cognitive brain was no longer in charge. The mind was running its own crazy relay race, but repeatedly dropping the baton. Sometimes I slept well at night, but the next day was so exhausted I could barely move. Other times I slept poorly, but felt energetic next morning. When I was not tossed around by gusts of emotion, I seemed adrift mentally, increasingly missing connections between events. Was I finally living in the moment, or was I unraveling? The final 3 chapters of the book describe my near physical breakdown at Tassahara and the kind intervention by the abbess, who actually said to me, maybe you should get out of the Zen for a few hours a day, which was so sweet. She found some things for me to do that I wasn't sitting there going mad. My return home, where it took part of these chapters is my return home, where it took several months for me to recuperate and begin with this writing project. The writing process took almost over 6 years. Oh, wow. And it was the way that I came to understand what had happened to me at Tassahara, and to understand how my early conditioning had caused me suffering throughout my life. Like many people, I had blamed myself for my failings. I did not see that my failings were the result of multiple causes and conditions within and outside of me. Moreover, they were not intentional failings. This was a major insight for me. It led me to forgive myself for being imperfect. I want to report that I have felt distinctly better ever since I had this new insight, more complete, freer, at ease in my life. I'd like to say a couple of things about the writing process that I grappled with to do this memoir. First of all, the early drafts, and there were 7 or 8 or 9 of them, included more episodes and people in my life than I ended up keeping, as a memoir usually would. But as I worked to understand the life experiences and choices I had made that caused me and others pain, the insight into their causes I gained at Tassahara became more the point of my book. So I cut out a lot of what I had originally included to focus on the main learning I received from my Zen practice, culminating at Tassahara. An Amazon reader whom I don't know wrote a review of the book and praised it and described me as having had a difficult life. I was surprised, but I realized the book might convey this impression. I'm a little embarrassed because I've had many good things happen to me in my life, and I didn't include them because they didn't serve the story I wanted to understand and also to share with readers. A writer's choice of craft over reality, I have to confess. The abbess at Tassahara talked a lot in her teachings about how we humans make up stories about everything, ourselves, other people, and their motives, what they think of us, etc. The Amazon reader's impression reflects the book's story, but not my own actual complete story. Second thing, when writing about Tassahara and the difficult time I had there, I worried that what I said could be taken as criticism of the monastery or of Zen. I didn't want that to happen because I'm devoted to Zen. I was greatly relieved after I'd finished the book when to read Sogetsu Norman Fisher's back cover endorsement of my book. He's given many talks at Village Books and is really a great guy. About my book, he said, especially moving is Edie's detailed description of her monastic training period at Tassahara, a place I know very well. It is the best and most thorough description of what happens there that I have ever read. I am so moved by this book, unquote. Wow. I was so relieved to get that at the end.
That was a great blurb.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, very great. So that's what I have to say, and I would be happy to entertain questions if anyone has them.
Well, yes. So folks, feel free to pop some questions in the Q&A function there at the base of your screen. But before we get to those, there's some things that I want to ask and say. This book is it's not a big book, but
No.
there's a lot in it, and it's almost divided into kind of two books. There's the first part of it that is kind of the foundation. It's your life, it's your youth and things that happened in your life. Some very, very difficult things that were painful to read. Some of the I don't like to spoil or give things away, but there was a bit of bullying, some really terrible bullying. I mean, so even at a very young age, you had trauma really
Mhm.
to deal with. And then um, marriage, two marriages, and that definitely some tragedy. And then the second part of the book is about your experience at Tassahara. And so there's just so much in this little book. Also, I appreciate that at the end there's a glossary. So for people such like me who don't know these words, it was very helpful to have the glossary in the back. So I'm glad that you included that. Um, but what I want to ask you about, because I'm a mother and I read a lot of books that deal with motherhood and fatherhood, and I'm curious about your relationship with your sons and what your sons thought of your journey from when you started with Zen, when they must have been very young, started this practice, and then the evolution as you went deeper and deeper, and it became more and more a central part of your life. How what did they think of that?
Well, one of them at least is probably listening or watching this. The one that's far away, where he's safe. But they were skeptical, or I think, or a little wary. And I did never try to make them do any ceremonial things or learn anything about it. And I just got up at 6 in the morning and sat in the living room for Zazen every day and that kind of thing. And I went to the Zenjo myself, and I didn't draw my kids into it. Although my younger son did participate in a few things as years went on. But I've never tried to proselytize them. They've never been inquired about it I think they just have accepted that this is a part of our family life. But actually, you probably should get them to tell you, because I haven't actually imposed that on them.
Oh, okay.
I didn't require them to tell me what they thought about it.
Huh. Well,
So
let's
it's an
see.
unanswered question still.
Okay. Okay. Um, I appreciated where you talk about how, as a parent, sometimes we have maybe hopes. I don't know if it's hopes or expectations, or maybe a little bit of both, about what your relationship with your kids is going to be like, especially as they become adults. And when it doesn't, become what you think maybe it's going to be, it's supposed to, or you expected it to, there's a certain amount of, acceptance that needs to happen, and just that, you having, expectations are rarely good things.
Oh, oh,
The
yeah.
resentment's waiting to happen, right? So, um, but I appreciated that when, as parents, when we have this ideal or what we think our relationships are going to be like with their kids, sometimes it's not what we think is going to happen, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a big moment when I came to realize that I couldn't expect them to make my life good or content.
Mhm.
That was up to me, and I hadn't realized that before. And the Zen practice really helped me
Mhm.
come to terms with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I included that because I know that can be a major thing in lots of lives.
Mhm.
Is to when the family dynamics change and you're not in charge anymore.
Right.
That's a big shift.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then going on to the description of your experience at Tassahara, I can't recommend enough to folks to read this book because um, I admire so much that you did what you did and that you were able to do what you did at Tassahara, because I think a person even who's not of advanced age,
It's tough.
it would be so tough. I mean, you are staring, you're in zazen, you are looking at a wall,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, your face. And I just think about all the things that the mind does, the things that the body does, the body wants to do, and it was very inspiring.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank
Well,
you.
I actually I trained for it. I mean, I got I swam many times a week for a year before going. I made sure I was in really good health and strong physically, and
Mhm.
I did yoga every day. I was there, and they had a swimming pool there too, and I could swim on a day off. And
Yeah.
so I just kept really working hard.
Wow.
Didn't drink coffee, and just kept really
Wow.
healthy.
Wow. Well,
And
let's
still,
look
I
at,
fell apart.
well, and I mean, and that tells you how difficult, how
Yeah.
difficult. So let's go to some of these questions. We actually are gathering quite a few here. So, Judy asks, do you find that being a Zen priest makes it easier or more difficult to be with people who behave carelessly or unkindly toward others?
It's more interesting. I don't know if it's easier or more difficult, but it's more interesting because it's human beings dealing with difficulties. And so I think probably I'm more curious
Okay.
about it and willing to not know what that's about. That phrase "don't know" came in very handy for me at Tassahara when I learned that I really didn't know. I didn't have enough information to understand or interpret
Okay.
what was happening.
Okay.
It helps now in these days too, a lot.
Yeah. Yes. I can see how that would be true. Marianne Exall says, hi, Edie. She wants to know if you're still painting, and if so, has the content or process changed as a result of your Zen practice?
I'm not painting currently, and I kind of took a long time to write the book, which became my central focus for several years. And so I hope to get back to doing painting again. And I was working on watercolors, but also in pastels, which are quite opposite media. But
Oh, that's what I work in. I love working
yeah,
in pastels.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope to come back to it, but I haven't. I have to get through this book process first. So one thing.
Um, and Elaine Kress says that she loves the title of your memoir, and she wants to know how you chose it. Autumn
Well,
Light. Oh, I know how you chose it.
yeah. Autumn Light is the translation of my priest name, which is in Japanese. It's actually on the back of this. This is my little rakusu, which is sort of an indication of my practice commitment. And that a person gets, you don't have to become a priest to do this, but a priest makes a new one for it. So my Japanese name is Shuko Zaku, and it means autumn light. So that's what that is from.
Mm.
And so I decided, because I'm in my autumn years and I have some light, that's why I
Um,
wanted to name it.
and Bernadette is asking, do you have a sense now, looking back, why you waited until you were 78 to be ordained?
Well, I didn't aim at that age at all, but I was ambivalent for many, many years about whether I wanted to do that, and thought, no, I wouldn't. And then about a year later, I thought, oh, wait a minute, I think I will. So it was pretty serendipitous, it seems like, but I was interested in it maybe 25 or 30 years before, and realized that I thought I would look really glamorous with a shaved head. That's probably the wrong
And did you?
motivation.
Did you look very glamorous?
No, I just look bald.
Oh, I wonder how how did your sons react when they saw you with a shaved head?
Kind of, ooh, no, I don't know. I wasn't, they were there when I got it shaved in my backyard. Some friends,
Uh-huh.
Zen friends came over and we did that, and their family was there. And my two granddaughters were there. And so they got through the process. And I think that kind of helped with the shock level
Mm.
of the appearance, because it is a big surprise. In
Yeah.
fact, I ran into the house to look at the back of my head because I thought it might be flat. So I held a mirror. It was okay, actually. I didn't know that it was all these years.
Oh, that's funny. Um, let's see. Oh, a fellow memoirist, Linda Morrow, wants to know, can you share just a bit about how you've moved through the past 8 months, a time which has been so difficult for so many? If you could make just one suggestion about how to respond to the current stress we are facing, what would that be?
Return to the present moment is really always much simpler, it seems. I can't say always, but mostly simpler. Like I'm drinking my coffee. That's what I'm doing now. And I'm picking up my dish and I'm going to wash it and keep returning to that. And you break up the static and the anxiety.
Mhm. I think that's exactly, you're exactly right. Thank you for that. Um, Lorene wants to know, let's see, she says, you describe that through your writing, you came to understand the meaning of your leopard dream. Um, I wonder if you partook in any other practice like mediation, contemplation. I don't know if it's mediation.
Meditation, probably.
Yeah, I think it's probably meditation, contemplation that augmented your coming to insight about the leopard's meaning for you in your life.
Well, I didn't understand what exactly it was. I had a really hard time articulating what the leopard stood for in my life. And I didn't understand until I really finished the book. I finally realized that it was probably my protector.
Hmm.
I thought maybe it was an attacker, for a long time. It certainly felt that way in the dream. But I realized that it was a protector, but it was a protector that was so good, it got in the way of my understanding what was going on in my unconscious. So I finally worked that through, and didn't work it through until I worked it through at, like into 6 years of writing. Didn't happen easily. I didn't have that in mind. I knew that I was going in that direction, but I didn't know what it was until I could actually write it.
Hmm.
That was pretty interesting about writing something like that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't come easily usually. Yeah.
You may have sort of partially answered this already. Betsy wants to know, Edie, what was happening in your life when you determined to become an ordained priest? It's an unusual to make that commitment in one's later years. So, do you remember specifically what was going on in your life when you
I was
decided?
here in Bellingham and I was part of the Red Cedar Zen group, and I had been the head student for a previous year or two before, which means that it's an honor role, and you give classes and you give talks, a couple of Dharma talks and so forth, and it's a a challenging role to have. And when I was through with that, somebody asked me, well, now's the next step, ordination. I said, oh no, I won't do that. I decided I would never do that. And then it occurred to me, wait a minute, I'm not doing anything else that will help me to grow and really offer anything to others. So maybe I could do that. And that's how it happened. And it's not that I didn't doubt that decision all along the way, but when I came up to having to go to Tassahara and wanting to not have to do that, I still said, okay. So there was something in me that really needed and wanted to do the ordination.
Mm-hmm.
I can't explain it better than that, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, the next question, let's see. As the bookseller in the room, I am inclined to say you're going to have to read the book to find out, but I'll let Edie decide if she wants to answer this or not. So Patricia wants to know, how was your reintegration when returning from Tassahara?
Oh, it was tough. I was really upset. I was really angry that I allowed myself to get through this because I was a wreck.
And I was very surprised by that. I was surprised at your anger, but it made perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, people who didn't know much about Zen or were friends in other capacities in my life were totally bewildered about why I was so angry.
Mm-hmm.
But that happened, subsided in about 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. And then I tore my rotator cuff in a fall, right. And I had to rehab that, and which I did, swimming and deep water walking. And so I had to pay attention to my body in the same way that I actually had to do in Tassahara. So I had full-time occupation for about 6 months afterwards. So got me through.
I reading about Tassahara inspired me. The only bread recipe that I ever make is from the Tassahara bread book. So
Yeah.
yesterday I made a couple loaves of Tassahara yeast bread just because.
Oh, good.
I love it, and it's very meditative. I love that process of making the bread from their book. Okay, and finally we have a comment from Pierre Constantine.
Oh, good.
He says, I know how tough you are, Edie. No one runs a marathon from one day to the next. I also know how gentle you are with yourself and others. Thank you for this book.
Oh, thank you.
And to add to that, I would like to, immediately when I read the introduction, I was just really compelled to read more. There's a part in your introduction that I just want folks to hear. It's just a couple of sentences, but you say, I am not an important person in Zen. I am not a charismatic teacher. I am a participant in and a witness to the flowering of Zen in America over the past 50 years. It is from this obscure but privileged position that I have recounted my life's experience in Zen Buddhism into old age and how it has inspired me. And that just made me want to read more.
Good, thank you.
There are, let's see, we have Nick is saying, thank you, Edie. It seems like you have answered many questions about your time at Tassahara. Ruth White wants to know, what do you still wonder about? What questions remain?
About Tassahara, I wonder, do you think that's what it's saying? No, probably about life, right?
I think just in general is what I'm getting from that. Yeah. That's but then it says Alan Block. I don't know if that question. So it says, it seems like you have answered many questions about your time at Tassahara. What do you still wonder about? What questions remain?
Well, I'm working on death now.
Okay.
In preparation for that. Mm-hmm. And I have to say I'm resistant. And that's interesting. And I have a very good friend who's in the process of dying. So I'm thinking about her a lot. And it's a big transition, which I hope to do adequately. So.
Okay, we have one last question. Is being a priest different from what you expected? Does it feel like it fits you? And that's from Susan Moon.
That's from what?
Susan Moon is asking
Oh,
that.
yeah, Susan. Good.
Is being a priest different from what you expected? And does it feel like it fits you?
I think it fits me because I'm here doing it, and not because I merit anything, but it has to mold itself to my capacities and interests. And I'm terrible at ceremonies, and I have kind of crippled up, and so I can't stand and walk a lot. And so I can't, and I have a terrible voice, so I can't chant, lead chants, and so forth. So I can't do what priests normally do. So my version of being a priest is just what I can do and am interested in doing, which is helping in whatever way I can, and helping and run our Zen Sangha and contribute to that. So it's just using the kind of oath and vow to help others is really the best way I can express my priesthood, and do it in whatever minor ways that I can.
Yeah. Well, we have a situation and that questions keep coming in. So I think I'm going to do Kate's, and then that's the last one. So does that sound good to you? Can you
Sure,
take one more?
sure.
Okay, so Kate says, I was at the pool with you often soon after you arrived home, and remember that anger or maybe disappointment. I'm glad you have reached peace about it since then. Would you change anything about your time if you were to manage Tassahara? And when you speak of death being a big transition, what do you mean? So that's two totally separate questions. So would you change anything about your time if you were to manage Tassahara? Would you do anything differently there? And then when you're talking about death being a transition, what do you mean?
I don't know that I could change anything at Tassahara. It's established. It does its trick. It's
Right.
for much younger people than I was, but I understand that Norman Fisher, the next a year or so ago, had some of his students go with him, and some of them were in their 70s. And it was tough for them in the same way it was for me. So it's kind of, I don't regret it. It was very difficult, and I did get very upset by it, but it also taught me so much that I really probably got more out of it, more positive than negative. So I wouldn't change that. I would just recommend that you to go earlier in your life. Would be a little easier for everyone. And then the second question was, I've forgotten it already.
It was when you speak of death being a big transition, what do you?
Oh, yeah. I don't want to say goodbye. I don't want to leave. Accepting that is hard for me. Um, but I'm hoping that it will make more sense to me as I get older and more incapacitated, that I won't want to be an advantage at some point. And who knows how sudden or desperate it might turn out to be. So I'm hoping that I can face it with equanimity, and the Zen practice really helps with that. And even being in the moment, being in the present moment is going to help, I'm sure, with the process of dying. Even if it's in a terrible accident and it's sudden, there's that moment,
Mhm.
you know. So I think we can pay attention and be okay.
Yeah. Well, Betsy couldn't have said it much better. So this is, I think, going to be from all of us. Betsy says, "Thank you so much, Edie, for your labor of love writing this beautiful book,
Thank you.
and thank you so much for um, for sharing it with us and for being with us here tonight. And thank you to the audience for coming tonight. And this was just lovely. Thank you."
Thank you. I enjoyed it so much. I'm glad you were here to be beside me.
Oh, was my pleasure, my honor. And of course, everybody, don't forget to buy the book at villagebooks.com.
Good store.
All right. So, any final thing to say, Edie?
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate being able to do the talk.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, I think we will say good night.
Okay, good night.
Right. Good night.